Camila woke up to the sound of her baby crying. The digital clock on the nightstand glowed an angry red, showing 3:17 a.m. For a moment, she lay there, her body heavy with exhaustion. 2 weeks of sleepless nights had taken their toll. She reached out, expecting to feel the warmth of her husband's body next to her, but her hand found only cold, empty sheets. As she dragged herself out of bed, a nagging feeling settled in the pit of her stomach. Something was off. The apartment felt different, emptier somehow. She made her way to the nursery, her feet shuffling against the worn carpet. The baby's cries grew louder as she approached, piercing through the silence of the night. Camila lifted her son from his crib, cradling him against her chest. His tiny body felt so fragile in her arms. As she rocked him gently, trying to soothe his cries, she noticed a strip of light coming from under the kitchen door. She frowned. She did not remember leaving any lights on when she had gone to bed. With the baby still in her arms, Camila pushed the door open. The harsh fluorescent light made her squint. As her eyes adjusted, they fell upon a piece of paper on the kitchen table. Next to it lay a golden band, her husband's wedding ring. Her heart began to race. She approached the table slowly, as if moving too quickly might make the objects disappear. With trembling hands, she picked up the note. 5 words were scrawled hastily across the paper. "I cannot do this anymore." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Camila read the words again and again, willing them to change, to reveal some hidden meaning, but they remained stubbornly the same. Cold, final, abandonment distilled into 5 simple words. She sank into a chair, her legs no longer able to support her. The baby, sensing her distress, began to wail louder. She tried to comfort him, but her own body had started to shake uncontrollably. Tears blurred her vision as the reality of the situation crashed over her like a tidal wave. Camila was alone with a 2-week-old baby, alone in a small apartment they could barely afford when there were 2 of them. Alone with a mountain of responsibilities she had no idea how to handle. As the first rays of dawn began to creep through the kitchen window, Camila remained frozen in that chair. Her mind raced through memories of their relationship, searching for signs she might have missed. The slight hesitation in his voice when they had discussed having children, the growing silences between them during her pregnancy, the look of panic in his eyes when they had brought their son home from the hospital. She had dismissed all of these, attributing them to normal new parent jitters. Now they took on a sinister new meaning. How long had he been planning this? How long had she been blind to his intentions? The baby had finally cried himself to sleep in her arms. Camila looked down at his peaceful face, marveling at how he could sleep so soundly while her world crumbled around her. In that moment, a fierce, primal love surged through her. She might be alone, but she was all he had. She could not fall apart. She would not fall apart. As the morning light grew stronger, illuminating the shabby kitchen with its peeling wallpaper and dripping faucet, Camila made a silent vow. She did not know how, but she would find a way through this. For her son, for herself. The day ahead loomed, full of uncertainties and challenges she had never imagined facing. But for now, in the quiet of the early morning, Camila allowed herself this moment of grief and fear. Tomorrow would come soon enough, bringing with it the harsh realities she would have to face. But for now, she sat in the silence, holding her son close, mourning the life she had thought was hers, and steeling herself for the unknown future that lay ahead. The alarm blared, jolting Camila from a fitful sleep. For a moment she lay there, disoriented. Then reality crashed over her like a cold wave. It had been a week since he left, and each morning brought the same sickening realization. She dragged herself out of bed, moving through her morning routine on autopilot. As she dressed for work, Camila caught sight of herself in the mirror. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her clothes hung loosely on her frame. She had not eaten properly in days. With trembling hands, she applied makeup, desperately trying to hide the evidence of her sleepless nights and tear-stained cheeks. The babysitter arrived, a teenager from the apartment next door who needed the money. Camila handed over her son, her heart constricting as she always did when she had to leave him. But she had no choice. She needed this job. As she walked into the law office, where she worked as a receptionist, Camila plastered on a smile that felt more like a grimace. Her colleagues greeted her with the usual morning pleasantries. She responded mechanically, terrified that if she let her guard down for even a moment, she would shatter into a million pieces. The morning dragged on, a parade of phone calls and appointments. Camila focused on each task with an intensity that bordered on mania, as if she could keep her world from falling apart through sheer force of will. Just before lunch, a well-dressed man approached her desk. He introduced himself as a new client, there for a consultation about a divorce. As Camila listened to him describe the breakdown of his marriage, something inside her began to crack. His words blurred together, replaced by the echo of that note she had found on her kitchen table. She realized the man had stopped talking and was looking at her expectantly. She had missed his question entirely. Heat rose to her cheeks as she stammered an apology. Her hands shook as she tried to type his information into the system. The letters on the keyboard swam before her eyes. The man asked if she was all right, concern evident in his voice. Camila nodded, not trusting herself to speak, but the simple act of kindness from a stranger nearly undid her. She felt tears welling up and blinked rapidly, trying to force them back. Mercifully, one of the lawyers emerged from his office at that moment, greeting the client and leading him away. Camila sat at her desk, taking deep breaths, willing herself to regain composure. She could not afford to lose this job. She could not afford to fall apart. That evening, after relieving the babysitter, Camila tried calling her ex-husband's parents. The phone rang and rang, eventually going to voicemail. She had left messages before, but they had never been returned. This time, she did not bother. The silence on the other end of the line said everything. As night fell, Camila sat at the kitchen table, a stack of bills before her. The numbers blurred together as she tried to make sense of them. Rent, utilities, food, diapers. The list seemed endless, and the money she had woefully inadequate. Her son's cry pierced the silence. Camila rose, her body aching with exhaustion, to tend to him. As she held him, trying to soothe his tears, her own began to fall. She did not know how she was going to make it through this. She did not know how she was going to keep them afloat. The night stretched before Camila, long and lonely. She knew sleep would be elusive, torn between the needs of her child and the worries that gnawed at her mind. As she paced the small apartment, her son finally quiet in her arms, she felt as if she was in free fall, plummeting towards a bottom she could not see. Yet even as despair threatened to overwhelm her, a small, stubborn part of Camila refused to give up. She had to find a way through this. She had to, because there was no other choice. With each step, with each breath, she silently repeated the mantra that had become her lifeline. She would survive this. They would survive this. The dawn would come, bringing with it new challenges. But for now, in the quiet of the night, Camila allowed herself to acknowledge the fear, the anger, the overwhelming sense of betrayal. Tomorrow, she would put on her mask again. Tomorrow, she would continue to pretend that her world had not shattered. But tonight, in the darkness, she let herself feel the full weight of her new reality. Camila stared at the notice in her hands, the words "eviction warning" glaring up at her in bold red letters. Her hands trembled as she read through the document, each line hammering home the precariousness of her situation. 2 months behind on rent, 14 days to pay or vacate. The walls of her small apartment seemed to close in around her. She had known this was coming. Camila had been juggling bills, paying just enough to keep the lights on and food in the fridge. But rent was a beast she could not tame. As she sank onto the worn couch, her mind raced. Where would they go? How could she possibly come up with that much money in 2 weeks? The next morning, as Camila rushed into the office, already 10 minutes late, she saw her boss waiting for her. His face was a mask of barely contained frustration. She braced herself for what she knew was coming. The confrontation was brief but intense. Her boss's words were clipped, his tone leaving no room for argument. This was her final warning. Any more late arrivals or absences and she would be out of a job. Camila nodded mutely, not trusting herself to speak without breaking down. As he walked away, she felt the last threads of her composure begin to unravel. She made it to the bathroom before the tears started to fall. As Camila splashed cold water on her face, trying to erase the evidence of her breakdown, the door opened. Denise, one of the paralegals, walked in. She paused when she saw Camila, concern etching her features. Camila tried to brush off Denise's concern with a weak smile and a flimsy excuse about allergies. But Denise was not easily fooled. Her gentle probing broke through Camila's defenses, and before she knew it, words were spilling out of her. The abandonment, the financial struggles, the overwhelming fear of failure, she laid it all bare. Denise listened without interruption. When Camila finally fell silent, Denise reached out and squeezed her hand. Her eyes were filled with compassion as she told Camila about a program for single mothers in difficult situations. They offered counseling, financial advice, even childcare assistance. She thought it could help Camila. Camila's first instinct was to refuse. She had always prided herself on her independence. Accepting help felt like admitting defeat. But as she stood there, the weight of her struggles pressing down on her, she realized she could not do this alone anymore. She hesitated, torn between her pride and her desperate need for support. Denise did not push. She simply promised to leave the information on Camila's desk, encouraging her to think about it. Later that day, Camila found a pamphlet on her desk. New Beginnings, Support for Single Mothers, the title read. Her hand hovered over it, indecision warring within her. Finally, she picked it up and slipped it into her bag. That night, after putting her son to bed, Camila sat at the kitchen table, the pamphlet open before her. The eviction notice lay next to it, a stark reminder of the precipice she stood upon. She took a deep breath and reached for her phone. As Camila dialed the number for the support program, she felt a mix of fear and relief wash over her. She did not know what lay ahead, but she knew she could not continue as she had been. It was time to reach out, to accept the help she so desperately needed. As the phone began to ring, she closed her eyes, silently praying that this would be the first step towards solid ground. The weight of her decision settled over Camila. It was not just about her anymore. It was about her son, about their future. As she waited for someone to answer, she felt a small spark of hope ignite within her. It was fragile, easily extinguished, but it was there, and for now, that tiny spark was enough to keep her going. The support center was a simple, almost anonymous building. Camila stood on the sidewalk, her son in her arms, hesitant. Each step towards that door felt like an admission of failure. She swallowed hard, adjusted the bag on her shoulder, and walked in. The interior was welcoming, but Camila immediately felt out of place. Women chatted in small groups, some with children playing at their feet. They all seemed so at ease, while she could barely breathe. Shame burned in her chest, mixed with a desperation she could no longer ignore. A woman approached, smiling gently. She introduced herself as the coordinator and guided Camila to a room where other mothers were gathered. Camila sat down quietly, her restless son in her lap. She watched him, so small and innocent, oblivious to the turmoil surrounding them. His little eyes met hers, and he smiled, a toothless grin that melted her heart and twisted it simultaneously. She wondered how she could feel so much love and fear at once. As the meeting progressed, Camila found herself drawn into the stories of these women. They spoke of struggles so similar to her own that it was both comforting and terrifying. One woman, Julia, caught her attention. Her warmth and resilience were palpable, and when she spoke about her journey, Camila felt a flicker of hope. After the meeting, Julia approached Camila. They talked, hesitantly at first, then with growing openness. As they shared their experiences, Camila realized she wasn't alone in this struggle. For the first time in months, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. That evening, as Camila tucked her son into bed, she watched him sleep. His tiny chest rising and falling, his fingers curled around his favorite toy. A wave of emotion washed over her, love, fear, determination. She stroked his cheek, marveling at how much he'd grown. It seemed like just yesterday he was a newborn, and now he was babbling his first words. Time was slipping by so fast, and she was terrified of failing him. The next day, fueled by a new sense of purpose, Camila decided to enroll in an evening social work course. It was a daunting prospect, but the thought of being able to help others in her situation gave her strength. As she pondered how to manage childcare, her elderly neighbor, Dona Clelia, knocked on her door. She had noticed Camila's comings and goings, the dark circles under her eyes. With grandmotherly concern, she offered to watch Camila's son during her evening classes. Camila stood there, overwhelmed by Dona Clelia's kindness, tears welling in her eyes. Her son, sensing her emotion, wrapped his little arms around her legs. She picked him up, holding him close, his warmth a reminder of why she was fighting so hard. That night, as Camila prepared for her first class, she felt a mix of excitement and guilt. She kissed her son goodbye, her heart aching as she left him with Dona Clelia. His cries as she walked away nearly broke her resolve. But she knew this was a necessary step, not just for her, but for him too. On the bus to the college, Camila looked at a recent photo of her son on her phone. His chubby cheeks and bright eyes stared back at her. She realized with a start that he had outgrown the onesie he was wearing in the picture. When had that happened? A pang of sadness hit her. Was she missing these precious moments in her struggle to keep them afloat? As the bus rumbled through the city, Camila made a silent promise to her son. She would build a better life for them. But she wouldn't let his childhood slip away unnoticed. Each step forward would be for both of them, for their survival and for their joy. With that thought, she squared her shoulders and prepared to take on this new challenge, her heart full of love, hope, and determination. The alarm blared at 5 a.m., jolting Camila awake. She silenced it quickly, her eyes darting to the crib where her son still slept peacefully. As she stumbled to the kitchen to start the coffee, she mentally rehearsed the day ahead: work, evening class, study group, and somewhere in between, quality time with her child. The juggling act had become her new normal. By 7 a.m., they were out the door. Camila dropped her son at Dona Clelia's, his little hand waving goodbye as she rushed to catch the bus. At work, she moved through tasks mechanically, her mind constantly split between responsibilities. During lunch, she scarfed down a sandwich while reviewing notes for her evening class. As the weeks passed, exhaustion became Camila's constant companion. Dark circles under her eyes deepened, and she caught herself nodding off during meetings. Her son's milestones, a new word, a wobbly first step, brought moments of pure joy, quickly overshadowed by guilt for the time she was missing. One evening, after tucking her son in, Camila sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by textbooks. The words blurred before her eyes, and a wave of despair washed over her. She wondered if she was fooling herself. Could she really do this? The thought of quitting loomed large, tempting in its promise of relief. The next day, Camila had her first therapy session. She'd been reluctant to go, but it was part of the support program. As she sat across from the therapist, her kind eyes watching Camila expectantly, something inside her cracked. Words poured out, her fears, her exhaustion, the crushing weight of responsibility. For the first time since her husband left, Camila allowed herself to truly feel the pain and anger she'd been suppressing. As she spoke about her son, about the future she wanted for him, about her determination to succeed despite the odds, tears streamed down her face. The therapist listened, offering neither judgment nor false comfort. When the session ended, Camila felt raw, but somehow lighter, as if she'd set down a burden she didn't know she'd been carrying. Weeks turned into months. Progress in her course was frustratingly slow. There were nights when Camila stared at her textbooks, the information refusing to stick in her tired brain. More than once, she came close to quitting. But each time, she'd look at her sleeping son and find the strength to push through one more day. Then, on a crisp autumn morning, everything changed. Camila was rushing out of Dona Clelia's apartment when she saw him, her ex-husband standing awkwardly in the hallway. 3 years of absence erased in a heartbeat. He looked older, a touch of gray at his temples, but his eyes were the same ones that had once promised her the world. Time seemed to stop as they stared at each other. 1,000 emotions coursed through Camila: shock, anger, a traitorous flicker of the old affection. He spoke first, his voice hesitant. He wanted to see their son. Camila stood frozen, her mind reeling. The carefully constructed balance of her life suddenly felt precarious. As she looked at the man who had abandoned them, who had missed first words and first steps, a surge of protective fury rose within her. But beneath the anger was a more complex emotion. A part of Camila recognized the courage it must have taken for him to come back, to face what he had done. and a smaller, quieter part wondered if his return might ease some of the crushing responsibility she carried. As she stood there, her son's laughter echoing from inside the apartment, Camila realized that this too was part of her tightrope walk. Another challenge to face, another balance to find. With a deep breath, she steadied herself. Whatever came next, she would face it as she had faced everything else, one careful step at a time. The law firm buzzed with its usual Monday morning energy, but a knot formed in Camila's stomach as she approached her desk. A file lay there, innocuous yet menacing. Its contents held evidence of their client's wrongdoing in a high-profile case, evidence she had accidentally uncovered while organizing documents. As Camila stared at the file, the weight of her discovery pressed down on her, revealing it could jeopardize the case, possibly costing her her job. Staying silent felt like a betrayal of everything she believed in, everything she was studying to become. She closed her eyes, her son's face flashing in her mind. This job was their lifeline. She wondered if she could risk it all for the sake of ethics. Before Camila could decide, her phone rang. It was Donna Clelia, her voice tight with worry. Camila's son had collapsed at the playground. Her world narrowed to a pinpoint of fear as she raced to the hospital. The next few hours were a blur of white corridors, beeping machines, and grim-faced doctors. Camila's little boy, usually so vibrant, lay pale and small on the hospital bed. The diagnosis, when it came, was like a punch to the gut, a rare autoimmune disorder. Treatable, but requiring extensive care and medication. As Camila sat by his bedside that night, holding his tiny hand, the full weight of their situation crashed down on her. The mounting medical bills, the specialized care he would need, the time off work she couldn't afford to take. For the first time since that morning years ago when she found herself alone, Camila felt truly overwhelmed. In that sterile hospital room, with only the rhythmic beeping of machines for company, loneliness engulfed Camila. She longed for someone to share this burden, to tell her it would be okay. But there was no one. She was alone in this, as she had been for the past 4 years. Just as dawn was breaking, casting a pale light through the hospital window, a nurse came in. There was someone there to see Camila, she said softly. Camila's heart leapt, hoping against hope it was her parents, finally having a change of heart, but it was him. Her ex-husband stood in the doorway, uncertainty etched on his face. Seeing him there, in this moment of crisis, unleashed a torrent of emotions Camila wasn't prepared for. He spoke of hearing about their son, of wanting to help, to be involved. He expressed a desire to make amends, to have visitation rights, to be a father. His words hung in the air, heavy with implications. The beeping of the heart monitor seemed to grow louder in the silence that followed. Camila looked at their son, peacefully sleeping, blissfully unaware of the storm raging around him. Then she turned back to her ex-husband, studying the face that had once been so familiar. In that moment, standing at this new crossroads, Camila realized that every decision she made now would shape not just her future, but her son's as well. The ethical dilemma at work, her ex-husband's reappearance, her son's health, they were all threads in a complex tapestry she was still learning to weave. As the first rays of sunlight streamed into the room, Camila took a deep breath. Whatever choices lay ahead, she would face them with the strength she'd discovered in herself over these past years. For her son, for her future, for the woman she was becoming, she would find a way forward. Camila walked into the small office of the Women's Support NGO with her heart racing. After years of struggle, she had finally secured an internship that could change her life. The cramped space and faded walls did nothing to diminish the sense of hope that flooded through her. In the first few weeks, Camila absorbed every detail of the work, every story from the women seeking help. When it came time for her to share, she hesitated. The words tumbled out: the abandonment, the sleepless nights, the daily fight to keep a roof over their heads. To her surprise, she saw in the other women's eyes not pity, but understanding. Camila's story, painful as it was, became a bridge. She began using her experiences to connect with other vulnerable mothers. Each time she shared, it felt like she was removing a layer of shame she didn't even know she carried. It was during one of these conversations that the idea for the microcredit project began to take shape. So many women with skills and dreams, but without the means to realize them. Camila spent sleepless nights researching, crunching numbers, drafting proposals. The enthusiasm of her supervisor when she presented the idea fueled her determination. As Camila immersed herself in developing the project, a new complication arose. Her ex-husband, who had vanished years ago, suddenly reappeared. He wanted to see their son, to be part of his life again. The request sent her reeling. Camila didn't want him around. He had no money to offer, and his presence promised more complications than solutions. After days of internal struggle, she agreed to let him see their son occasionally, but the decision weighed heavily on her. As Camila watched them interact during these sporadic visits, she found herself constantly questioning whether this was good or bad for her child. The uncertainty gnawed at her, adding another layer of stress to her already complicated life. Amidst all this, a colleague set Camila up on a date. The man was kind, attentive, everything she thought she wanted. But as the evening progressed, she felt herself building walls, retreating into her shell. When he leaned in for a kiss at the end of the night, panic seized her. She pulled away, mumbling excuses. The failed attempt at a relationship only reinforced Camila's fears. She wondered if she was destined to be alone. Could she ever trust again? These questions haunted her as she threw herself back into her work, finding solace in the microcredit project and the women she was helping. As Camila lay in bed each night, her son sleeping peacefully in the room next door, she grappled with the complexities of her new reality. The internship, the project, her ex-husband's reappearance, her fear of new relationships, each element pulled her in different directions. But in the quiet moments before sleep claimed her, Camila allowed herself to hope that somehow, amidst all this chaos, she was moving towards something better. Camila watched in awe as her microcredit project began to gain traction. What started as a small initiative within the NGO soon caught the attention of local media and community leaders. As success stories from the first beneficiaries emerged, she found herself thrust into the spotlight, a position that both thrilled and terrified her. The recognition culminated in an invitation to speak at a high-profile fundraising event. Camila spent weeks preparing, poring over statistics and rehearsing her speech late into the night, all while juggling her responsibilities as a single mother. The night of the event, she stood behind the podium, her hands trembling slightly as she surveyed the sea of expectant faces. Drawing a deep breath, she began to speak, her voice growing stronger with each word as she shared the stories of the women their project had helped. As applause filled the room at the conclusion of her speech, Camila felt a mix of pride and disbelief. It was during the mingling session afterwards that she met Miguel, a widowed university professor with kind eyes and an easy smile. Their conversation flowed effortlessly, touching on topics from social justice to favorite books. Camila found herself drawn to his intellect and gentle demeanor, surprised by the flutter of attraction she felt. In the days that followed, Camila couldn't shake thoughts of Miguel from her mind. They began to meet for coffee, their conversations growing deeper and more personal with each encounter. Miguel spoke of his late wife with a tenderness that moved Camila, and of his young daughter with obvious devotion. She found herself opening up about her own struggles and triumphs, feeling a connection she hadn't experienced in years. Yet, as Camila's feelings for Miguel grew, so did her fear. The memory of her ex-husband's abandonment loomed large, a specter that whispered doubts into her ear. She caught herself pulling back, erecting walls even as part of her longed to let Miguel in. The internal conflict was exhausting, leaving her torn between the desire for companionship and the fear of being hurt again. Complicating matters further was the ongoing situation with Camila's son's father. His sporadic presence in their lives continued to be a source of stress and uncertainty. She watched with a mixture of hope and apprehension as her son interacted with his father during their infrequent visits. Camila questioned whether these brief encounters were beneficial or detrimental to her child's well-being, the doubt gnawing at her conscience. The contrast between Miguel's steady, warm presence and Camila's ex-husband's unreliable appearances couldn't have been starker. She found herself constantly weighing the potential risks and rewards of allowing herself to trust again, all while trying to make the best decisions for her son. As the weeks passed, Camila stood at a crossroads. Her professional life was flourishing, her project making a real difference in women's lives. Personally, she teetered on the brink of a potentially meaningful relationship, held back by the scars of her past. And through it all, she continued to navigate the complex dynamics of co-parenting with a man who had once abandoned them. In quiet moments, Camila reflected on how far she had come, from the desperate young mother left alone with a newborn to the confident professional she was becoming. Yet she knew that the journey ahead still held many challenges. With a mix of trepidation and determination, she prepared to face whatever the future might hold, hoping that somehow she would find the strength to balance it all. Camila's world shifted dramatically when she received an unexpected call from the national headquarters of her NGO. They offered her the opportunity to lead a groundbreaking nationwide project, expanding her microcredit initiative to help thousands of women across the country. The offer was a testament to her hard work and dedication, a chance to make a real difference on a scale she had only dreamed of. As she listened to the details, her heart raced with excitement and trepidation. Simultaneously, Camila's relationship with Miguel continued to deepen. Their coffee dates had evolved into long walks in the park, family dinners with their children, and quiet evenings spent in comfortable conversation. Miguel's steady presence and unwavering support became a source of strength for her. Camila found herself opening up more, sharing her fears and dreams, and allowing herself to imagine a future that included him. The culmination of their growing bond came on a crisp autumn evening. Miguel had prepared a picnic in the same park where they had shared their first kiss. As the sun set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, he got down on one knee and presented Camila with a simple yet elegant ring. The proposal was heartfelt and sincere, Miguel's words reflecting the depth of his feelings and his desire to build a life together. Camila's initial reaction was a whirlwind of emotions. Joy and love battled with fear and doubt. The memory of her ex-husband's abandonment loomed large, threatening to overshadow this beautiful moment. She found herself frozen, torn between the desire to say yes and the paralyzing fear of being hurt again. In the days that followed, Camila grappled with her decision. The dual prospects of leading a national project and committing to a new marriage weighed heavily on her mind. She found herself at a crossroads, each path holding both promise and peril. Seeking clarity, Camila made a decision to revisit the apartment where her ex-husband had left her years ago. As she stood in the small living room, memories flooded back. The shock of finding the note, the sleepless nights with a crying infant, the overwhelming fear of facing life alone. But with those painful recollections came the realization of how far she had come. The bare walls that once witnessed Camila's despair now seemed to reflect her strength. She ran her hand along the kitchen counter where she had found the abandonment note, recognizing it as the starting point of her journey towards independence and self-discovery. The bedroom, once a place of loneliness and tears, now represented the countless nights she had persevered, studying and working towards a better future. As Camila stood by the window, looking out at the city she had once felt so lost in, she felt a sense of peace wash over her. She realized that the apartment, once a symbol of her abandonment, had become a testament to her resilience. The fears that had held her back began to loosen their grip. In that moment of reflection, Camila understood that her past did not dictate her future. The strength she had found in overcoming her challenges was the very thing that could carry her forward into new opportunities, both personal and professional. As Camila locked the door to the apartment one last time, she felt as though she was closing a chapter of her life. The decision she had to make still loomed large, but now she faced it not with fear, but with a newfound confidence. She was no longer the abandoned young mother, but a woman who had rebuilt herself, capable of love and ready for new challenges. With a deep breath, Camila stepped out onto the street, ready to embrace whatever the future held, knowing that whatever choice she made, it would be from a place of strength rather than fear. After days of soul-searching, Camila made her decision. She accepted both the national project leadership role and Miguel's proposal. The weight that lifted from her shoulders was palpable, replaced by a surge of excitement for the future. Preparations for the national conference consumed Camila's days. She poured her heart into organizing an event that would not only showcase their NGO's work, but also inspire others. As the date approached, she found herself revisiting her journey, preparing to share her story with a broader audience. The conference day arrived, and Camila stood before a packed auditorium. Looking out at the sea of faces, she took a deep breath and began to speak. She shared her story of abandonment, struggle, and ultimately triumph. The room was silent, save for the occasional sniffle. As she concluded, speaking of hope and resilience, the audience erupted in applause. The energy in the room was electric, filled with possibility and determination. Amidst the whirlwind of the conference, Camila found a quiet moment to reflect on her ex-husband's role in their lives. After much deliberation, she had decided to allow him to see their son once every 2 weeks, under supervision. When she informed him of her decision, she saw a flicker of humiliation in his eyes, but he agreed without protest. As she watched him leave, Camila realized that her feelings towards him had transformed. The anger and resentment had faded, replaced by a mix of pity for the mediocre man he was and compassion for her younger self, who had fallen for someone so lacking in character. This realization felt like the final piece falling into place in her journey of healing. The weeks flew by, and before Camila knew it, her wedding day arrived. The ceremony was intimate, held in the same park where Miguel had proposed. As she walked down the aisle, her eyes locked with Miguel's, his gaze full of love and promise. Their children stood beside them, Camila's son proudly carrying their rings on a small pillow. As they exchanged vows, she felt a sense of peace and rightness that she had never experienced before. Months passed, and Camila found herself settling into a new rhythm of life. One afternoon, she sat in her office at the NGO, taking a moment to breathe amid the constant bustle of their expanding projects. Her eyes fell on a framed photo on her desk, a snapshot of their blended family at a recent picnic. Miguel and she sat on a blanket, surrounded by their laughing children. The joy captured in that moment was palpable. As Camila gazed at the photo, she couldn't help but marvel at the journey that had brought her here. From the depths of despair in that small apartment years ago to this moment of fulfillment, both personally and professionally. She thought about the women they were helping through their projects, women who might be at the beginning of their own journeys of resilience. The challenges hadn't disappeared. Balancing her career with family life was a constant juggling act, and there were still moments of doubt and difficulty. But now, Camila faced these challenges with a strength she had built over years of perseverance, and with the support of a partner who stood steadfastly by her side. As she turned back to her work, Camila felt a renewed sense of purpose. Her own story had become a testament to the power of resilience and the possibility of rebuilding one's life. It was this message that she carried forward in her work, hoping to inspire and support other women facing their own crossroads. The journey hadn't been easy, and Camila knew there would be more obstacles ahead. But as she looked at the photo once more, she smiled, knowing that whatever came her way, she was ready to face it, not as the abandoned young mother she once was, but as the strong, capable woman she had become, surrounded by the love of her remade family and driven by a passion to make a difference in the world.